Okay, so in my last job, I was an admin for a training platform, and we had tens of thousands of users, which meant I spent a fair amount of time answering sort of tech support style emails. And this was not my full-time job at all. This was kind of like a side thing that I had to handle. And of course, a lot of the questions that came in were quite repetitive, and especially in, let's say, high peak times. So we just released something new, or we just had an influx of new users come in. I would probably block off around an hour every day just to make sure I stayed on top of the inbox. And I made keyboard shortcuts to paste common answers in. I documented like an FAQ database in case I was on vacation and my colleagues needed to cover the inbox while I was out. And basically the workflow I'm going to show you today is what I wish I had back then. It is essentially a team of AI assistants that catch emails that come in that have a question or request, look for the answer in an FAQ database, and then draft a reply for you. So let me show you. Everything is built in Microsoft Copilot Studio, and we're going to build what they call an agent, and then we're also going to build a workflow that's going to use that agent. So you will need a Microsoft 365 license that also has access to Copilot Studio. And basically, what will happen is the workflow triggers when an email arrives, and then there is a small team of AI assistants. One of them is an agent, and the other two are prompts that are built into the workflow. The first one will classify the email. What type of email is it? Is it a question, a request, information, etc.? If it finds that it is a question or a request, it will then call the agent that we're going to create that will go and find the answer in a database that we set up and then draft a reply. And if something is not a question or request, or if there is no answer in the FAQ database, the workflow will flag that email so you know that you need to handle it. And then all the drafts that it creates will be saved in Outlook, so your job essentially becomes reviewing and sending the email from your Outlook drafts folder. Okay, so here's what the Copilot Studio workflow is going to look like. And if you want personalized help building your own version of this, I've created an AI tutor prompt that you can use with your favorite AI assistant. It will, if you paste it in, interview you about your needs and walk you through the setup in Copilot Studio step by step. So I've linked that prompt in the description. So this is how we're going to build the workflow in this video. It's triggered when a new email arrives. Then we have a prompt that will classify the email. And if it's anything other than a question or a request, it will simply flag the email for you to have a look at in your inbox. If it is one of these two, it will send the email to an FAQ agent that will search for the answer to the question in an FAQ database. If it doesn't find an answer in that database, it will, once again, it'll just flag the email and it'll be sitting there in your inbox. If it does find an answer, it will pass that answer to another prompt that we're going to use that drafts a reply to the email and then saves the draft for you in Outlook. I'm going to start by building the agent that we're going to call in the workflow. I'm here at the homepage of Copilot Studio, and I'm just going to say create an agent from scratch. All right, so you can start by naming your agent, and then you can choose the model. And the best thing to do is to choose essentially the dumbest model that you can get away with. So I'm choosing GPT-5 Auto for this, but I would test yours with the cheapest possible to see if that works before upgrading to a more expensive model. And then instruction. I'm gonna paste my prompt in here. So basically, what I've asked it to do is answer questions based on an FAQ document. And I've been pretty specific about what kind of response format I want, because I don't plan to use this as like a chat bot agent. So I've asked it only to return the answer to be concise. Don't ask, these typical AI-isms. Don't ask if it was helpful, and don't thank the user. I gave it some brief instructions. You get a question, you search the document, and then you respond. And then I also added this, that it should just return no match if it can't find an answer in the FAQ document. And that's going to be important for the workflow. And then I gave it an example. So I'm going to save this. And then knowledge here is where you're going to link it to your FAQ database. And I would also disable web search because I only want it to fetch information from the knowledge database that I'm giving it. I don't want it to try to find unofficial answers on the web. So I have disabled this. And when you add the knowledge base, you can do it from a bunch of different sources, or you can take from OneDrive or something that you have on SharePoint. In my case, I have an Excel spreadsheet here in my OneDrive called FAQ database, and I'm going to add that. Okay, so that database is now good to go. And I can just show you what it looks like. It's just an Excel spreadsheet where I have columns for ID for each question, the general topic, the question itself, and then the answer. So this is just a sample for a training platform, the types of questions that you might get. And then we can actually just go ahead and test our agent. It's ready. And what we can do is, first I'll test something that we know is in the database. Let's just take, how do I reset my password? And when you test here, it's going to show you what it's doing. It's looking at the database now. I have to allow this connection. See, and here you can see that it has found the right answer, and it's given that answer to me here with no frills attached to it, just the answer. If we try again, now we can test what happens if you ask a question that is not in the database. So something like, what colors are available? Now you can see, as expected, we just get the no match response. So once we've tested these two cases, we can be pretty confident that it's good to go. It's capable of searching this database, and we can see that it's respecting the no match output if it doesn't find the answer. So now we're ready to jump into creating the workflow. We want to make sure that we publish this agent, and I'm going to go back home. And this time, we're going to start from scratch with a workflow. The trigger we're going to use is for Outlook, and it's going to be when a new email arrives. If you're working in a shared mailbox, there's also a specific trigger for a new email arriving in a shared mailbox. Okay, and we're just going to say folder inbox. No other configuration here. The next step is for us to classify the email that has arrived. I'm going to add a new action, and we're going to say run a prompt. And here in this dropdown, there are quite a few standard prompts that are already built, or you can add a custom prompt. And we are going to add a custom prompt later, but for this one, it's fine just to use the standard AI classify prompt. The input text is what it's going to use to classify. So we're going to take data from the previous step. It will be the body of the email message. And now here we're going to decide on the categories. Here I'm going to say question, request, information, or other. Those are the categories I wanted to use. And the question and the request are going to be the important ones for this workflow, because that's what's going to trigger the FAQ agent. At this point, we want to do something different depending on which category comes out of this action. So I'm going to add a conditional. This is under the control group condition. And now you can see it has added true and a false stream. And here's where we're going to specify the condition. So we said that if the category is question or request, right? Those are the important ones. So if, and then we're going to take a dynamic value here. This is the previous prompt that we ran, and we're going to take the the text, so that's the outcome, if it is equal to question, or same value, this text is equal to request. We're going to define here what happens if this is true, if it's either a request or a question. We're also going to define if it is not true. And you could just leave this blank. If you leave this blank, then the workflow just stops and nothing happens to that email in the inbox. What I like to do as a sort of visual indicator for myself is, I'm going to look again for the Outlook, is I actually want to flag this email. It is here. So I'm going to take flag email. And for the ID, I'm going to fetch that from this very first action. We should see message ID. There it is. So that's it. If it's not a question or a request, it'll simply flag the email and the workflow will stop. And now I have to define what to do if it's true. And that's where we want to pull in our FAQ agent. So the action I'm going to add is under Microsoft Copilot Studio, and we're going to do execute agent and wait. The reason that we want to do execute agent and wait is because we want to use the response that the agent comes with in a later point in this workflow. So we need to make sure that we get a response before we move forward. Now we can choose from our published agents. This is the one that we just made, FAQ bot. And if I show advanced parameters, it's going to need the text from the email in order to see if there's an answer to the question. So here is the message that's going to be sent to the agent. And I'm going to choose the body of the email message. Now we're going to add another conditional because we want it to do different things depending on whether or not it found the answer to the question. So I'm going to add another. This time I'm going to configure based on the response from this agent that we executed. So I'm going to take the last response that it gave. And I'm going to say if the response it gave is not no match. Because if it's not no match, then we're going to go over then this true column and we're going to tell it to draft the email. If it is no match, once again, we're just going to have it flag the email. So I'm going to add that action again. All right, so now we're to the home stretch and it's the fun part. Let's get drafting. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to run a prompt again. This time we're going to say new custom prompt. And I made some instructions for my assistant. I made this prompt super simple. And that is also my advice to you. Make it as bare bones as possible. And only expand on it if you think it's not really working. But to answer simple questions like this, I don't need a very complicated prompt, but I don't feel like I need a style guide. I just need to be able to draft a nice sounding email that has the right information. So I have given it a little bit of context. I have given it my name because it might not be in the email that's being sent to my inbox, especially if it's a shared inbox. And I asked it to create a professional email reply to the following email because we're going to be passing the email along to it. And I've also asked it only to write the body. Otherwise it might start making subject lines and stuff and we don't need that. I gave it some brief instructions about you should start with hi and sign off like this. And then I've asked it to output in HTML. That just makes the formatting of the email better. So I would include this, especially if you're going to use this in a similar workflow, I would include this in the prompt. The last thing I have to do is I have to let it know that it should expect some more information in the message itself. So I need to define some variables for it. The first one is the email to respond to. And the way I'm going to add a variable in here is I just push the / button. And I say this is going to be some text input that it is going to expect, and I can name it. That's going to be email body. And it might also be nice to add another text input, which is the sender name, so that in case it's not in the email itself, so they can add hi, John, or whatever. And then it's also going to get that information from the FAQ agent. And I'm just going to tell it additional information and make another text variable like that. Choose the cheapest model that you can get away with. You can pick them up here and save. Super. You could have, actually, I probably should have renamed the prompt. Now it just has the date and the time, but you can always go in and edit this prompt and you can give it a more descriptive name. So do you see here what has populated in the action? These are the variables that I added in the prompt. We have to pass sender name, additional info, and email body. And these we do by pulling them from previous steps. So in sender name, we're going to take the from the message. Additional information is going to be the response from the FAQ agent, and then the email body from the original email. When this prompt is finished running, we have some text for our email, but we don't actually have it in Outlook. So the next couple of actions we're going to add is what's going to set it up as an Outlook draft. Unfortunately, for some reason, there isn't a native action in Copilot Studio that creates a draft reply in Outlook. This kind of feels like a blind spot for Microsoft, because you can send a reply. So we could just, if you feel like living in YOLO mode and you don't want to review the drafts before they go out, you can set up an action here that takes what the prompt outputs and simply sends a reply to the message. You can also write a draft. There is an action for writing a draft, but that draft isn't threaded with the original email. You wouldn't be able to see that it's connected to the original email. So we're going to do a sort of a more programmatic approach where we're going to use Outlook's API to create an empty draft that's in reply to the original email message, and then extract this text from the prompt and populate the empty draft with that text. So it looks a bit tricky, I guess, but it's not, as long as you just take it step by step. Step 1, the action we're going to add is an HTTP request. Here under the Outlook category, we have send an HTTP request. This URI is essentially a way of telling what it is we want to do. And I'm going to paste this in here and show you. Okay, so what we're essentially saying is we want to create a reply, and I've left this little placeholder here because we're going to need to add the message ID. See, it's looking in my email and it's looking at messages, and now we need to tell it which message are we creating a reply for. We're going to take that as before from the very first step, message ID. So now it knows which message ID to look for and to create a reply for. And the method we're going to use here is post, because it is creating something. And then we just want to make sure the content type is application/JSON. So that is going to create an empty draft in reply to this message. Step 2, we're going to need the message ID of the new draft. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm adding an action called parse JSON. And the content that we need to grab is from the previous step. This HTTP request, the body is what it's going to return. And for the schema, just going to paste this in. This is essentially telling it what is the structure in the content that it needs to look for. How is it going to be structured? This could almost be a video in itself, but if you're doing this exact same setup, you can use this schema. And if you're doing something slightly different, you can definitely ask your AI assistant to help you figure this out. Okay, so this is going to pull the ID of the new draft. And the final step is now to insert our email message into that new draft. I'm going to add another HTTP request. I'm going to paste this URI in. So once again, it's looking for the messages. And now we need to give it the ID of the new draft that has been populated, which means we need to take it from this parse JSON, the body ID that we got here. The method here is patch, because we're adding something to something existing. And once again, we want to make sure that it's content type application JSON, although that usually auto populates. Final thing we have to do is we have to tell it what to add into this draft. So I'm going to show all the advanced parameters and find body. So this is the body content that's being sent along with this request, and that is what it's going to plug into the draft. All right, this is what I am going to put into body. You can just put this, copy paste this in. It's telling it that the content type to expect is HTML. That's also why I asked that prompt that writes the email message, I asked it to write it in HTML. And then here in content between these two, what are they called? Quotation marks. Between the two quotation marks, we're going to add that text that the last prompt generated for the email. That was this run prompt 1, and we want the text here. So that's it. We have finished the whole workflow, triggering when a new email arrives, then running the classify prompt. And one little tip is you can rename these actions just for your own sake when you're reviewing the workflow. So here it is classify email, for example, you could say. Then you can rename the rest of them so it's easier for you to navigate. But we've classified. If it's not a question or a response or a request, it'll flag the email. Otherwise, the FAQ bot will get to work, and then if it has the answer, it will create the response and populate a draft, and that draft will be waiting for you in your inbox. The last thing you want to do is, of course, test that it's working well. And the way you do that is first you do have to publish it, and then you can click test. And here you can say manually, which means when you click test, now it's going to sit and it's going to wait for the trigger, which means now you can manually send a new email that you want to test the workflow with. So let's do that. Okay, so I send an email from my Gmail account to my Outlook account with a question. I pulled the same question we used to test the FAQ bot, which was how do I reset my password? And when that arrived in my inbox, this test flow started, and you can monitor it as it progresses, and you can see all the steps completed successfully. And you can always expand these to see the details, especially if something fails. You can also pinpoint exactly where it failed. But this ran successfully, and I'll show you in Outlook. Here is the email that I sent. How can I reset my password? And here is the draft waiting for me. Starts with hi, ends with best regards. It's a nice, simple, professional email, and it has the information from the FAQ document about how to reset my password. So there you have it. It was a success. In terms of troubleshooting, I can tell you one thing that I have experienced a few times, and it's a little bit annoying to debug, so let me show you what happens. When we do these HTTP requests, I'll just take the second one as an example. Oh, I need to edit. I'm still looking at the outcome of the flow here, but if I go back into edit, I can see what we originally configured. Right. Okay. So in this URI, right, we inserted a variable from a previous step. And what often happens is when I put in a variable, it will actually delete a slash here automatically. I think it's because the shortcut to create a variable is to add a slash. And so when you put in a variable, even if you do it without adding using the slash command, it deletes the slash just before it. So I have a few times gotten these weird errors where an HTTP request will fail. And it's not that easy to see right away that it's because there's a slash missing here. But I'll often check for that if I have some of these failed, that there probably is a missing slash. So I'll just make sure to add it back in, and then everything works fine. And that's it. We've built a complete email assistant. It will classify incoming emails, search for answers in a FAQ database, and draft a professional reply that's saved as a draft in Outlook. Everything that can't be handled automatically gets flagged for you, and everything else is just sitting and waiting for your review. The thing I really like about this flow is that you stay in control. Nothing is sent without your approval, but the The AI assistants in this flow are doing most of the heavy lifting for you. And the reason I think it's so important that you stay in control is because anytime you plug AI into something, you are going to face a certain amount of indeterminism. So it's not going to handle everything perfectly. Some questions will slip through, some answers won't quite fit, but it's still going to take a lot off of your plate. The way this system works best is ideally if you already have a very strong documentation culture, so if you already have FAQs well documented. But even if you don't, you can get started, and the more you add to the FAQ database, the better, of course, this system is going to be over time at answering most of the questions that come in. And remember, if you want to build something a little more customized that's specifically for your use case, go down to the description and go grab the AI tutor prompt, because it'll be like a Copilot, a personal Copilot that can walk you through your own setup in Copilot Studio. If you have questions or comments, do let me know.